Hi there, just read this disclaimer please. Alright guys, so I'll get straight into it. The inspiration for this video.
Is renting a home really a complete waste of money? You've heard all the sayings, why pay the land? Right,
so basically it's this video. I'll put a link to this video in the description. So it's quite interesting. Basically, he just goes through some math. Well, he doesn't go through it in detail, but he goes through some scenarios about renting versus buying. He kind of has, well, kind of two identical twins maybe, or I prefer to think of it as the same person in two parallel universes. One where he rents, one where he buys. There they are. They wear different clothes. Obviously people who buy houses are more casual than the renter who needs to impress the landlord. So he kind of outlines basically their financial situation is exactly the same. They've got the same amount of cash. Presumably they earn the same amount of money in their job, etc., etc. And then sort of goes through the scenarios. This guy buys a $500,000 Canadian dollar. Yeah, it's a Canadian channel. £500,000 house. They go through all the costs of buying that house and the mortgage that he'll need, etc., etc. And then he goes through the equivalent scenario in year one. Sort of works out how much of the mortgage has been paid down. I'll skip ahead. So what he does is he works out how much it costs the buyer in monthly mortgage payments and maintenance of the house, and he basically says is we'll have the renter spend the same amount on his rent, and then any excess goes into investing instead. See here he works out that actually the renter will have this much more left over that you can invest 1,000. Sorry, 1,000. Got it the wrong way around, didn't I? You'll have 1,100 Canadian dollars a month to invest. And he kind of goes through the scenarios from year 1 to year 25, and with all of the various costs for Canadians buying houses and stuff. Skip ahead to the result. Finds that actually they're not that differently. So in the net worths, the net worths aren't that different, and basically that rent doesn't have to be the completely wrong decision financially if you do it the right way. Well, I'm not sure that the maker of this video actually said that, but that's the message I get, is that if you do it the right way, it doesn't have to be a complete financial disaster in comparison to buying a house. And then he sort of goes through a few different scenarios. But basically it just got me thinking, and it got me wanting to make a spreadsheet. So I made a spreadsheet to kind of work it all out, but also to UKify it a bit instead of it being Canadian things. You know, they have things like property taxes, which we don't really have here, and we have stamp duty. I presume they have an equivalent, I'm not sure. But anyway, so I've spent a lot of time, well, I don't know, probably about 5 hours making this spreadsheet on and off. And what I've done is basically the same thing, but in spreadsheet form. So what we've got here is similar to the last spreadsheet. The greyed out cells. It's not really that dominant a colour, is it really? But basically, what you need to do is, the user of this spreadsheet enters the white cells. So basically, you put in how much cash the two people have. I've put in 33 grand here. You put in the house price, 270 grand. What I've done is I've gone to Rightmove and I found an area of Norwich. God knows why it was Norwich, just pretty random. And I found two houses that look pretty similar. I've no idea how comparable they are. I'm sure one's probably nicer than the other, I don't know. But a 3-bedroom house, kind of newish looking build. One for rent, one for sale. Although it looks like the one that was for rent is now gone. Someone's taken it, sorry folks. So the rented house was £795 a month, and to buy a house that looks kind of similar, 270 grand. So I've used that as an example. So £270,000 for the house. You put in the buying cost. I've completely estimated it. It's been a long time since I bought a house, but what I've done is I did a quick mortgage search as a hypothetical and found this deal. I went for a fix for 10 years at 2.8. I think it's 10 years. Where is it? Yeah. Okay, yes, 121 months. That's just over 10 years. So 2.85% interest rate. And I've used the costs that were put here: application fee, product fee, valuation fee. I've added about, what have I added? Oh, 2,900 stamp duty. You need to add that in there, and then I've put in £1,000 for solicitors' fees. God knows how accurate they are. So the user of the spreadsheet, if you want to download the spreadsheet, you can enter more realistic numbers. And from that, it's then subtracted all the costs to tell you how much you've got available to use as a deposit. I've then entered how much it costs, or an estimate for how much it will cost to keep on top of the maintenance of the house, because obviously, for a fair comparison to a renter, that needs to be added, because a renter, the landlord would, well, don't know, listening to some stories, maybe the landlord wouldn't fix things, but if you have a good landlord, they'll do all of the fixing. So you need to add the maintenance cost for the buyer each year, and then each year I've added a parameter for adding inflation to the cost of maintenance. It then, I don't know why those two are in between. That really should be up there. Let me cut those and insert cut cells there. There we go. That makes more sense, doesn't it? So the mortgage subtracts the deposit. Sorry. Yeah, so it's the mortgage is the house price minus the deposit. And from that it works out the loan to value. Because I think this is a 90% mortgage here. I think you need to have a loan to value below, 90%. So I've put that in just as a check to make sure you're meeting the criteria of whatever mortgage you might be looking for. Already said that, maintenance fees. And then house price inflation, you can type in what you reckon house price inflation might be, and then how long you want the mortgage to last. They're normally 25 years. I think that one that I've applied for is 25 years. And then the information about the equivalent rental property. So it's £795 a month, and you might expect some inflation. It might not happen every year, but over the long term renting, the rent will go up. You'll probably move house a lot more often as well if you're renting, won't you? Sometimes the landlords might sort of decide to sell a house and kick you out. And then for any money that is in excess, the two parties can invest the excess over the other person. So basically, if the yearly cost for renting is lower than the yearly cost for buying, then the renter has some excess in comparison to, basically the excess is that number minus that number. So if the two were spending the same amount on their properties to make it equal each year, in the first year the renter can invest about £5,000 into an investment portfolio, and obviously it works it out each time. And then obviously at some point the rent goes up, so the yearly cost, which is the rent, goes up by 3% every year, but the yearly cost for the buyer won't go up as much, because all that's going to go up there, well, sorry, I tell a lie. If the interest rate goes up, then it will go up more, but if the interest rate stays the same for 10 years, for instance, the only thing that increases it is the maintenance cost going up by 3% each year. So what's that, 30 quid extra in the first year? So at some point, the yearly cost for the renter will be higher than the yearly cost for the buyer. And as you can see, that's the point where it happens here. So at this point, instead of the renter having some excess to invest, it actually switches around, and in this column, the buyer now has some excess money to invest. What I'm trying to do is make the two people, the one person in two parallel universes spends the same amount of money, and then anything that's above these amounts that they earn, they're equal anyway, because they're both free to do exactly what they want with the money above. All we care about is the money that is needed for either one of the properties, depending whether it's rent or buy. So as you can see, once the rent becomes higher than the mortgage payments and the maintenance, it then becomes the buyer of the property who can now invest in a separate investment portfolio that's separate from the house. But as you can see from here, it's some pretty complicated formulas in there. I learnt about this PPMT function as I was doing it. I hope it's correct, but as usual, I'm no expert at anything, and I'm not exactly an expert in Excel, so there could well be errors in here. I've tried my best, but you know, take it all with a pinch of salt. Do some sense checking of any numbers you get in here. But as you can see, I've worked out this function seems to work out how much of the mortgage gets paid off each year. I think I've programmed it correctly. I've put in the right formulas. So as you can see, the first year, the yearly cost, you pay the mortgage payments, you pay the maintenance, and that much of the mortgage gets wiped out. So obviously the liabilities, which is the mortgage balance, gets lower, and as you can see, the further into the mortgage you get, the more gets paid off, because less of the monthly payment is interest. As the mortgage balance goes down, less of the payment is interest and more of the payment is principal repayment, or probably not the right term. And as you can see, as it gets to year 25, it goes down to 0. Or if you want to go to 30 years, it goes down to 0 at year 30. But I'll put 25 in because the example I've given is 25. And as you can see, the property value goes up by how you've programmed it here. I've told it to have a house price inflation of 4% a year. So the property value goes up. So your net worth is the property value. Minus the mortgage, which is column E, the liabilities, plus column H, which is your investments. But obviously for the buyer, that investment stays at 0 until later. I mean, in reality, they probably earn a bit more money and they could have separate pots. But for the purposes of comparing rent and buying, their investment pot is 0 for the purposes of this comparison. Any excessive income they have over and above these don't matter to the comparison, because they're both free to do what they like with that excess. So as you can see, the net worth is calculated year by year for both scenarios. So for the investment scenario, he starts off with 33 grand, he invests it all. It goes up by 8% a year. So the net worth is the amount from the year before plus 8% investment returns plus M4. So it's adding how much you can add to the investment portfolio in comparison to the buyer. So it adds that and it just grows and grows and grows. And as you can see, the numbers go down like that. Which you can see after 50 years, in the scenario that I've put in, the buyer's significantly better off. But I mean, what I've put in here, who knows? I haven't bothered to go looking at like 50, 100 years worth of historic house price inflation or investment returns. But I mean, it's pretty obvious that for the renter to win in this scenario, you're going to need much higher returns than the buyer. So if we put in house inflation at 2%, I still probably reckon the buyer would win. So what, it takes 3 years before the buyer is better off than the renter. Even when you're getting 4 times the returns, you're getting 8% return on your stocks, 2% return on your house inflation. And by the end of 50, well, let's go to where by the time you've paid off the mortgage, only 30 grand, not that much of a difference, I suppose. I suppose at some point it might turn around, mightn't it? Because the effects of gearing worn off. Yes, so by 50 years, the renter's winning on that scenario. But it takes a long time to get there. So it's because the gearing is the reason it's so much in favour of the buyer. It's all down to the gearing. Let me get that number back to where we were, 4%. Because you've got a 270 grand house there, a 4% increase on 270 grand is, what, 10,200? But you've only put in 33 grand to start with. So that's like a... God, it's like a 30% return on your money. For you put 33 grand in, it's all because of the gearing. But obviously the reverse happens. But this is why you buy houses for long term. You never buy them for like 5 years or something maybe. But it is all down to the gearing. So as you can see, it took going down to like 8% versus 2%. Sorry, that's the wrong cell. 2% house inflation was a pretty close call, wasn't it? It depended on the year as to whose net worth was better. But I think that's down to the loan to value amount. If we increase the amount of cash they both start with, say if we go to 100,000, the numbers. Oh, sorry, I've entered 10,000 instead, haven't I? 100,000. So it starts off again, but again, it still only takes 2 years for the buyer to win, to be ahead again, because the LTV is still 64%. But because it's if we go down and down and down to the bottom, I think there was about $1 million difference when the LTV was 90%. See, the difference is only about 400,000 there now, right at 50 years. But obviously, the higher the LTV goes, if we go to 200,000, that's probably going a bit too far there. Let's go 170,000. LTV of 30%. So you're still not really borrowing much money, are you? So starts off with. It's pretty close, pretty close for most of the time. And then I'm guessing the renter might start winning. Yeah, see, the renter is a good few hundred grand better off there. And it's because the gearing starts off at a lower level, so you don't get as much gearing. So gearing seems to be the key to it. And that's why you make a lot of money on properties, because you have a lot of big loans. That's what makes the most money. Even if you have very modest price rises, you get really good returns. But you'll notice that each year that goes by, the percentage increase won't be as good, because each time you pay off a load of the mortgage, the loan to value goes down because you've paid off some of the mortgage. So the amount of gearing you get each year is lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. So maybe that's why interest-only mortgages are good. Maybe if you invest properly and you don't get stung with loads of fees. I don't know much about endowment policies, but I've got a feeling they didn't work because they had just astronomical fees, and the returns on whatever investments were made to pay off the mortgage weren't good enough to pay off the mortgage at the end. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about historic data. I mean, I've just assumed that house prices will be lower than house price returns will be lower than investment returns. Who knows? That might not be true. It might be that they return a similar amount, 8% each, and in which case, buying just, well, in this, oh yeah, that's the other point. This is just these two houses in Norwich. But for these two houses in Norwich, if they end up returning similar amounts, just buying just blows it out of the park. But who knows? I don't know what will return the highest amount. I've kind of hindered the house price. I don't know why, just to make it look like that, I suppose. So yeah, if you went to two other houses, who knows? Maybe if you did the same thing in the centre of Oxford, maybe a house in Oxford that cost 270 grand, maybe that might only rent for 650, and then that's a whole nother dynamic to the spreadsheet and the numbers that come out of it. So I guess it's not one answer that fits for everything and every house everywhere. There might be different scenarios in different areas, so it might be useful just to compare two houses if you're thinking about buying or you're thinking about renting. But obviously there's a lot of assumptions that go into the spreadsheet, so predicting exactly what would happen in each scenario is impossible probably. But anyway, I thought it was fun making that spreadsheet. I know I'm very sad, and other people might find it useful, so Here's a little clip from a previous video on how to get the spreadsheet from Google Sheets. Okay, so to view the spreadsheet, you just click the link and it'll open it up. But then when you go into the spreadsheet, you'll notice it says view only, and if you try and type, it won't work. So if you want to just use Google Docs to mess around with it, you just go to File, Make a Copy, change the name, OK, and it'll think for a little while. It opens a new tab with Copy Advisor, and then you'll notice when you try and change the numbers like that, it lets you. But obviously, if you've got Excel though, it's much easier to just go use it in Excel. So go to Download in the File menu and Download in Excel. Click OK. Show the desktop. And then you can just open it. It just has a formatting issue when it goes from Google Docs to Excel. But the rest of it's pretty good. And then you can just mess around with it in Excel if you want, which is obviously easier. Alright, see you next time. Goodbye.